Have you ever wondered how to make sure that your staff are less likely to get sick and have to call in on a Tuesday? Well, universal precautions are the answer to that question. So every year you should probably have in your schedule of annual training a training on universal precautions. So we're going to do a quick little 15-minute primer. Really, this should be an hour-long training that you do every year with your staff. But let's get going, kind of a start. If you want the whole outline and materials for the 1 hour training, just comment in the comments below and I'll get you the information on how to get that. So I'm Carrie, and today we're going to be talking about universal precautions. So what does universal precautions mean? It means it is a phrase used to encompass everything you should do to prevent or reduce the likelihood of getting a communicable disease. Now, this runs a wide gamut, but what we're going to talk about today is just the things you should do to prevent contagion from bloodborne and the scariest of the respiratory illnesses. But again, this goes, all of universal precautions includes other things as well. So the number one thing to do to prevent the spread of communicable diseases is washing the hands well, including the half of your forearms when you're washing your hands and getting between the fingers. And I'm sure you guys have probably heard this before, but you need to do it for about the length of time of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or ABCs. And if you can, you want it to be in warm water, but the agitation is the thing that gets most of the work done. So if you can't do warm water because, I don't know, you're on the playground, then using cold water, as long as you're using agitation, will help. The best of all worlds is warm water and a good soap, and using that for the amount of time that you would sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Now, when do you wash your hands? All the time. You wash your hands when you come in from outside. You wash your hands before you prepare food, after you prepare food, before you help a child with eating, even if that's a bottle, and after. You wash your hands before you help someone with toileting or diapering. You wash your hands after toileting and diapering, whether that's you going to the bathroom or helping a child with it. You wash your hands if you've used your hand to cover your mouth when you sneeze. Wash your hands. If you've had to wipe a nose, you wash your hands. There are, I believe, 22 different times in the day that you may have to wash your hands in early childhood. So number one precaution is washing your hands well. Now, I often get the question, well, what about just using that alcohol stuff, the disinfecting lotion? Here's the thing. With washing your hands, you are actually physically removing a lot of the germs from your body with the agitation and the flow of water. When you are using the rubbing alcohol and simply letting the rubbing alcohol evaporate off of your hands, what you are doing is reducing the number of germs on your hands. You're not actually getting them off of your hands. And a lot of those germs are actually becoming more and more resistant to the alcohol. And so you're actually helping to create superbugs when you do that. But my bigger concern with the rubbing alcohol is that if you have the alcohol on your hands and it somehow ends up in a child's mouth, you can end up with alcohol poisoning. There are a lot of children every year in the United States. I didn't look up the statistics before doing this, but feel free to. There are children every year in the United States that are getting alcohol poisoning because of this hand sanitizer solution. because you're putting it on their children's hands, and then the children are putting their hands in their mouth. People are using it on pacifiers. They're using it in all kinds of ways that it was not meant to. And so children are getting alcohol poisoning. Some of them are dying of it. Others are developing brain damage. If someone is in their 20s and they decide to go binge drinking and they get brain damage because they made a poor life choice, that's their poor life choice. If a baby or a toddler at your program gets alcohol poisoning and has brain damage because you didn't want to go in and wash your hands, that's completely unacceptable. So I strongly recommend not using that product at all. Off the soapbox now. Okay, so the next step is to use gloves whenever possible, especially when coming into contact with bodily fluids. What are bodily fluids? Snot is a bodily fluid. Vomit is a bodily fluid. Urine is a bodily fluid. Bowel movements are bodily fluids. And of course, blood, which is what everyone thinks about. I strongly suggest that you always just keep a pair of gloves in your pocket when you're working with children, because you never know when somebody is going to skin their knee, when they're going to throw up, when something crazy is going to happen. They're crazy, and it's hard to know when things are going to happen. So just keep the gloves in your pocket, and when you see that situation, put the gloves on, help them with the situation, then pull the gloves off. I've actually got a handout that's on how to take the gloves off properly. So you grab this one, pull, and then grab this one, and it'll have the other glove folded inside it, and then throw that away. Take any fabric things and put them in the wash in high heat. Any other things need to be disposed of because they are contaminated. Okay. Why do we need to worry about these bodily fluids? Well, the answer is that a lot of diseases are carried in bodily fluids. Colds and flu can be, but what we're really thinking about is HIV and hepatitis. Those are the two that are the scariest, that are bloodborne diseases. Hepatitis A, B, and C are all carried in the blood. HIV is carried in the blood, but there are other diseases as well. You can get a complete list of all of the bloodborne diseases if you really want to get freaked out. I think it's safe to just say that there are some that are incapacitating and life-threatening that are carried in your blood, and so to prevent the possibility of you being exposed to them, or to reduce your likelihood, use these universal precautions. Carry the gloves, use them when you come into contact with bodily fluids. A question that frequently comes up here is, well, so do I need to use gloves when I change diapers? My answer would be yes. I encourage all my staff to always use gloves when they're changing diapers. It does make your skin dry, and so I always keep lotion by the changing table or the bathroom where toileting is happening with the toddlers. But I would rather you be safe than sorry. So I would rather you use gloves all the time. But at the bare minimum, use gloves when you are changing poopy diapers, because there's more likelihood that there will be blood in a BM diaper than in just a wet diaper. And there aren't very many diseases that are carried in urine. But to be completely safe, wear them all the time that you're dealing with bodily fluids. So we've talked about hand washing, and we've talked about gloves. So the other thing is, okay, well, what happens if you're in a situation where you don't have gloves and you come into contact with bodily fluid, or you may have, you're not sure. Say, for instance, you've got a child who's got an EpiPen, they had an allergic reaction, you stuck them, and then during all the hullabaloo of that, you notice that the cap was not put back on the EpiPen after administering it. So it's possible that you or someone else has come into contact with that pin. Cool. That could be a problem because you're never going to know who at your center has a communicable disease, or at least you shouldn't, for most of them, because that's confidential information, which means their medical professional can know, and if it's a child, probably their parent knows, but it's up to their discretion whether or not they tell anybody on staff at your center, unless it's even if it's a reportable disease. But if it's something that's going to cause exclusion from the center, they may or may not tell you that they have hepatitis, or they have amoebic dysentery, which is carried in urine, or and feces. You may not know. So always presume that it's possible that that child is sick, or that staff member is sick. So if you have that pinprick, or the possibility of the pinprick, what do? You wash the area with soap and water, and you report it as a possible pinprick to your doctor, and they will do testing. They'll test you for HIV, and they'll test you for hepatitis usually. Okay? Some doctors won't be that proactive, others will, but let them know that there's a possibility you've had exposure to a pinprick, or that you were helping a child who fell down and just busted their face all up and you didn't put your gloves on, or there was some splash that came up into your face of vomit, or whatever it is. Let your doctor know. Let the doctor do whatever is considered appropriate preventative care for you and what you need to look for. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not here to tell you what to look for. What I'm telling you is, if you get bodily fluids into any of your orifices, or a newly formed one because of a pinprick, you need to tell a doctor, and they need to consider what kind of treatment may be needed. Cool. We've dealt with hand washing, we've dealt with gloves, we've dealt with unexpected exposure. So that's all stuff primarily that has to do with bloodborne contagions. Okay? The other type of contagion that we really have to worry about in early childhood is respiratory infections. You can also have, of course, various abdominal viruses and things like that. And again, the hand washing, your best bet to help with that. But tuberculosis is another huge concern in child care centers, as is RSV, which is a respiratory virus that children get very frequently, and it's one of the #1 triggers for asthma for children. And so RSV, we as adults don't usually have any significant effects from it, but we do from tuberculosis. So how do we prevent the spread of RSV or the flu or tuberculosis? We still have hand washing as a huge part of that, because people have a tendency to cover their cough with their hand, even after a decade at least of people being taught cough into your elbow. So teaching the children and the staff to cough into their elbow is a huge part of that. And again, that's part of why when we wash our hands, you might want to go ahead and get all the way up to that elbow, because we've coughed into it. If you know that you have a cough, you might want to consider one of those little masks, kind of like the ones you use when you're painting, or that a doctor uses when they go into surgery. Because if you already have a cold, your lungs are already compromised, and it's easier for you to catch a secondary infection. So you're not wearing the mask to keep your cold from getting out as much as you are wearing the mask to keep other people's germs from getting into your now compromised lungs. Drinking a lot of water is a key universal precaution, believe it or not, when it comes to respiratory illnesses, because a moist set of lungs is better at fighting off infection than dry. So drinking that half gallon to a gallon of water every day is considered a universal precaution for respiratory diseases. And using a handkerchief, a napkin, or the elbow to cover coughs, and having everybody have a cover your cough rule is the way to go there to help with that. The other big thing to do is to make sure that you're getting new air circulation throughout your center. Having your center always be 100% closed is actually going to increase your respiratory infection rate. And so having a schedule for when you have, you know, maybe on a Saturday you open all the windows in the building for an hour, making sure that you're changing the air filters at least once a month. There are the 3-month HEPA filters, and those are great for allergens, but they don't do, you still can get a buildup of respiratory material in there that can cause contagion. So changing your filters often, covering your coughs, washing your hands, and staying hydrated are universal precautions to reduce the likelihood, oh, and a mask, are universal precautions to keep down the contagion of respiratory diseases. Again, if you want all of the materials for doing an entire 1-hour training on this topic with your staff, leave a comment below or PM me directly with your email address, and I'll be happy to send you the information on how you can get that. It's going through some edits right now, so it may be a couple days before we get it to you. There will be a SurveyMonkey available for this training as well. So have a great week and take your universal precautions and keep everybody as safe and healthy as possible.